Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. I am here with my beautiful wife, Tana.
We are so excited to be introducing you to the core of what we do together.
So we're taking all the work I've developed, all the work Tana has developed, putting it into one course for you to have a better brain, a better body, and a better life. And I know you have seen so many people transform.
It's just miraculous, and it's so much fun, and this is what we really live for. So,
and we're going to give it to you step by step. It's going to be a lot of information. It's going to be hopefully in digestible chunks, but our goal is to create brain warriors so that you can get healthy, but also give it away to the people you love. I mean, isn't that really the most fun that we have, is that when people give it away?
well, then that's how we know you really got it. I mean, we have a saying in nursing school, see one, do one, teach one. And it's really when you start teaching, not only do you get excited about it, but it's how you know that you really understand it and you're doing it. It's planted in your life.
One of my favorite stories is Steve. So Steve was 630 pounds a couple of years ago. He was depressed. He had a 25-year addiction to alcohol and nicotine. He had sleep apnea, hypertension, diabetes, chronic pain. He was suicidal, but he was so big he couldn't get upstairs to get his gun.
He was pretty much
housebound. He was on 10 medications, and whenever Steve would fall, one or two people could never get him up. He would actually have to call 911 and a team of people. And so this day, he lived in North Carolina. He fell, he called 911. There were like 9 people that got him into an ambulance, and he went to the hospital. And he told himself, I'm either going to get well or I'm going to kill myself. Now, just by random chance, if you believe in random chance, his sister saw one of our public television specials on in North Carolina, got him our program, and when he got back from the hospital, it was there, and he just started doing everything we said.
Which is so exciting, because it really works the best when you do that.
Some of you are going to go, what's the one thing I should do? And I used to say, the one thing you should do is stop being stupid and do them all. And he did them all. Now we know the one thing. We'll tell you that as we go along in the course. Yes. But he had his important numbers checked. He learned about his brain type. He only ate whole, high-quality food that served him. He started to exercise. And, you know, he's so big that he obviously couldn't run. He would move. Right. In his chair.
Yeah, he would wiggle in his chair and flap his arms. And
he was a musician, and so he would move in his chair, and at 4 months, he had lost 159 pounds.
That's like unbelievable, actually.
I actually remember...
Especially for somebody who can't get up and exercise.
It was a Sunday morning when I got an email from him. He's like, I love your work. It's transformed my life. I want to meet.
Oh no, you came running in and showed me this email and these photos, and I'm like, that's the coolest thing.
So look at these pictures. So this is him 2 years later. He had literally lost almost 400 pounds.
Right.
In fact, the doctor said when he had gotten like down to 400 pounds, if you can just lose another 100,
I love this.
Then we can do the lap band surgery. And he's like, if I lose another 100 pounds, I'm just going to keep going.
Right, that's a sign of intelligent life, right? But what I love about this photo, if you look at the photo, in the after photo, what you see in the belly there isn't actually belly, it's skin. So he did, you know, because he was so big, he used to laugh at himself. And what I loved about Steve was his attitude. He had this amazing, fun attitude about life when he went on this journey. And he would make fun of himself, and he would sing, you know, If I Could Fly, and wiggle his arms, because he had all this skin.
Well, do you remember when we brought Chloe?
Yeah.
So we went to Massachusetts, where he lives. I was giving a lecture. Tana and I were giving a lecture. And he actually did it for her because of all the skin.
He'd wiggle his arms.
I can fly, I can fly.
Right, and so what you're seeing there is skin. And he eventually, I think, did have some surgery just to get the skin, you know, back to a normal for his size.
So he also lost his diabetes, pain, his memory was better, his mood was better, he had better energy, he's addiction-free and off 8 medications. So
8 medications.
if you think this is hard, or you can't do it, or you're so far gone, I want you to think of Steve. And Steve is actually one of the coaches in the Brain Fit Life program.
And
so
he fits,
Steve is awesome.
Yeah, he just fits so perfectly because he's really a great mentor for mindset and motivation and how to really get started. So,
and he's a warrior. And
really
ultimately, it's what we want to create in you, is we want you to be a warrior for the health of your brain and, of course, the health of your body.
Right.
So the problem, as I see it, is the health of our society is just going the wrong way. I mean, really, it's everywhere we go. The promise of Brain Fit for Life is if you need to be thinner, smarter, happier, look and feel younger. In addition, we're going to directly attack obesity, Alzheimer's disease, depression, and aging.
And not everybody, this isn't about weight loss for everybody. I see many people who it's fibromyalgia or brain fog or depression or, I mean, lots of different issues. So, and weight's not always one of them.
Right. If it's an issue for you, it is for 2/3 of Americans, this is the right program. But if you are underweight and you just really want to know how to get healthy, this program is for you. If your weight's just perfect, but you want to really decrease your risk for Alzheimer's disease, have a healthier, happier mood, decrease aging, this program's for you.
Because what I often say is, you know, weight loss is the stunning side effect of vibrant health. And what we're going to do is help you get vibrantly healthy, and your weight will normalize in that process.
So talk about meeting Dr. Michael Rose.
Oh, so much fun. So, you know, I'm going to be really candid here and say that going to psychiatric conventions is not one of my favorite things. I don't know if you've ever been to one.
She actually doesn't really like psychiatrists except for me.
I almost canceled my first date with him when I found out he was a psychiatrist, but that's another story. Until I figured out he was really different. But I went to this event with Daniel, and this man comes running up to me, and I thought he was a psychiatrist at first, and he said, "I have to tell you, I love your show on public television. I love your book, and I don't think you know just how right on track you are with this information." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool. That's so nice." And he said, "No." He said, "I'm a researcher. I'm a PhD.
So this is Professor Michael Rose from UC Irvine.
Right. And he said, "This is all I do. I study anti-aging and how to decrease inflammation and reverse the aging process." And he said, "I'm not sure if you really understand that what you're doing and what you're promoting is exactly what works."
And he said it can actually stop aging. So if you really want to get healthy and stay that way, you know, one of the things that I heard recently from my friend, Dr. John Townsend, who does a lot of business consulting, he's a psychologist. He said, CEOs don't peak until their 70s. And I love that because I turned 60 this year. And a lot of people, when they turn 50 or they turn 60, they start getting bummed about dying, about aging. And, you know, it's just never been my thing because I'm always excited about what I do. But if you're not taking care of the health of your brain and the health of your body, you're going to feel those. We're going to give you a better way,
right,
a way out of how awful it can be, right? But to make your life as good as it can be for as long as possible. So that's our promise to you. The program, well, this is a 12-week jumpstart, but it's a lifelong program. So we're not giving you anything to lose 10 pounds to get into the wedding dress or, you know, you're going to your daughter's wedding. What we want, this is not a 500-calorie HCG diet. This is a program that you can stay on for the rest of your life, that you should stay on for the rest of your life, to keep your body and your mind in good working order.
So I want to add to that. So a lot of people are very surprised because this is really about abundance. People are often surprised by how much they get to eat, by how tasty it is. because that's the opposite of what a lot of programs are. And in the final phase, what we really focus on in the final phase is how do you plant this so that you can do it forever.
So we want you to create the habits that you can do for the long haul. The platform, so what is it really based on? You have to live it. You have to give it away and take it everywhere you go. So if you want to know the sneaky motivation behind what we do, it's to create warriors who then create healthier systems. And we have experience doing that in our own lives. But at Saddleback Church, so one of the largest churches in the world, we help create and plant a program called the Daniel Plan that's actually gone to thousands of churches around the world, in businesses, at the Salvation Army, at a large drug treatment program. We want you to become a warrior and to see how you can influence systems. But the only way to do that is if you do it in your own life. Because quite frankly, if you don't live the message, you won't be a good messenger. So let's talk about the outline. Today, what we're going to talk about is assessing your brain, including knowing your brain type and knowing your important numbers. Absolutely critical to get a baseline because you can't change what you don't measure.
Right.
Next time, we're going to talk about knowing your motivation and journaling your progress. You got to have this deep sense of why do you care. We're going to help you with that. And we're going to talk about eat right to think right.
Which, of course, is my favorite part.
It's the longest part, but it's absolutely essential. We're going to talk about the gut-brain connection. So important, just fascinating. We're going to talk about boosting your brain power. So obviously, you got to have the strategies to have a healthy brain. We're going to talk about training your brain and exercising to, in particular, optimize brain function. We're going to then talk about killing the ants and learning how to not believe every stupid thing you think. Soothing your stress. Stress is just such a major cause of illness, and we'll give you ideas on how to deal with that. We're going to talk about brain healthy supplements. I actually have a very special guest that's going to do that with me, Dr. Paris Kidd, who's the Chief Science Officer at Amen Clinics, who's a PhD from UC Berkeley, really a pillar in the nutritional supplement world. We're going to talk about barriers. It's just so important, how failure is never fatal unless you stop, how to get control over your cravings and food pushers that are just everywhere. We're going to talk about how we get better together, how to put it in your families, your kids, your co-workers, how to really become a brain health evangelist. And we're going to give you lots of practical tips and tools and answer questions and give you shortcuts and so on. So that's what we're going to do in this course. We couldn't be more excited to be your guide in the process. The problem, the health of our society is going the wrong way.
It really is. In fact, they now believe that 1 in 3 children born after the year 2000 are going to have type 2 diabetes. That's just crazy.
Crazy. Right? And it's totally preventable. Time Magazine said that 75% of the healthcare dollars are spent on chronic preventable illnesses.
So 75% on preventable illnesses.
And our program will help you do just that. So clearly the problem, one of the problems is everywhere you go, somebody's trying to shove bad food down your throat, from the foot-long hot dogs at the ballpark to the huge meal portions at restaurants, and they ask you to supersize everything. For less money.
I actually have a response when people do that. I'm like, I will pay you to stop harassing me to be sick. I'll pay you extra to just leave me alone. So,
one of the things to deal with food pushers, they're huge billboards pushing fast food. I actually saw this billboard. So I'm driving to LAX. We live in Orange County, south of Los Angeles. And I'm driving through Long Beach to the Los Angeles International Airport. And on the right side of the freeway is this huge billboard for this
amazing
tower of torta sandwich.
I mean, who can eat that?
It's just not good for you. And I'm like horrified when I see it. And then, no lie, I turn to the other side of the freeway, and see this billboard for losing weight with lap band. Dieting sucks.
It was a good
Get
strategy.
the band for weight
That was
loss.
a good strategy for the lap band people.
And I'm just thinking of how crazy is this world where we have billboards encouraging your inner child to get out of
because
control.
we have trained our inner child, I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now, and you can't stop me.
But then saying you need surgery to get the inner child
Right, like
back
I will
in
do
control.
anything I have to not be deprived. But we're going to talk a lot about deprivation and what it really means.
So one thing that should horrify you is Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple in the next 30 years. There is no cure for it on the horizon.
That's scary.
It affects 50% of people who are going to be 85. So can you imagine, we work hard to have a successful life and we work on our health and so that we live to be 85 or beyond. 50% risk of being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And the thing that should really horrify you, it actually starts in the brain decades before you have any symptoms.
Right.
So if you think about this, these are 2 SPECT scans. SPECT is a study we do at Amen Clinics that looks at blood flow and activity. The image on the left is healthy. The image on the right is a 59-year-old woman that was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, which meant she likely had brain changes in her 20s. So if you're waiting to get really healthy, you might want to rethink that.
You're
right?
trying to scare people, aren't you?
I'm just trying to tell you the truth. I mean, you'll hear me say many times throughout this course, one of my favorite Bible verses is John 8:32. Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So, if you knew a train was going to hit you, would you get out of the way? So these women are
so
actually...
what's the logic of them being on this track?
So they're on a railroad bridge, and there's no way out. And they didn't know a train was going to hit them. Now, they don't die. They actually laid flat on the tracks. But are you on a railroad bridge where there's no out?
Right.
And I just want you to think about that through your lifestyle habits. Are you really begging, encouraging the train to hit you? Most people don't know, but depression is one of the greatest killers of our time. It is actually the #1 cause of medical illness around the world. It affects 50 million Americans at some point in life. It's a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes. This program will help you. Obesity is obviously a serious national crisis. 2/3 of us are overweight. 1/3 of us, more than 1/3 of us, are obese. In 2008, the medical cost in the U.S. alone was $147 billion.
It's amazing.
Obesity related diseases account for the leading causes of death: hypertension, stroke, heart disease, and cancer. It's a risk factor for over 30 medical illnesses, including Alzheimer's disease, depression, and suicide.
You know, a lot of people, we've heard, okay, so are you discriminating against people who are overweight or obese? And the answer is no, we're not discriminating against people who are overweight or obese, but we want you to understand that those fat cells are not innocuous. They're making you sick, they're leading to other chronic illnesses, and what we want to do is teach you, educate you, give you the weapons so you can become a warrior, and we want to help you.
Well, we want you to know the truth, and we want to give you the tools to get help.
And we understand that a lot of it is not your fault, and you'll understand why as we get into this.
The obesity epidemic is skyrocketing. So if you look at where we started in the early 80s, you can see in the early 90s it's a problem. By 2000, it's nearly everywhere. And by 2010, it is everywhere in the United States. I think this relates to when we started taking fat out of our diets.
Part
and
of it
we
does.
replaced it with sugar.
But it also, some fascinating facts. If you look at where the obesity epidemic is most highly concentrated,
So look at where the dark red is.
right, it actually goes along with the Mississippi River, where they dump a lot of toxins into the water. And so they now think that the obesogens and the environmental toxins are a huge factor.
Obesogens.
Obesogens, we're going to talk about those, but they're basically things that you consume. Environmental toxins, they're in your food, they're everywhere now, but they actually distort hormonal function and they cause all sorts of problems in your body. And they make it, I mean, that's what I mean by it's not your fault. It's not as simple as calories in, calories out.
So we think the answer is not to see obesity, depression, and Alzheimer's disease as separate disorders, but rather as interrelated disorders that are really different expressions of the same unhealthy lifestyle that have exactly the same
So
treatment.
I love this because, so I do a lot of speaking and sometimes for academic institutions, and it gets really complicated. I'm looking at all these disease processes and I'm like, when you look at the disease process, you get lost. You go down this rabbit hole. There's so many things and, you know, it sort of freaks you out. But what I love is that when you look at the solution, so if you're in the disease process, it's hard. But if you're in the solution, it's really easy. So because they're not different disorders. So what's good for your brain is good for your heart, is good for your reproductive organs, is good for your hormones. It's the same thing.
So there are many ways to get sick.
Right.
And there's really one path to wellness. And that's what we put in this course for you.
And what we mean by that, it doesn't mean that the one path is like it's just one size fits all. It's not. We actually will show you how to customize it for you. It's just it's one path, and then on that path we teach you how to make it yours.
So I want to share with you some terrifying statistics. There are 200 studies now that say as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down, which should just scare the fat off anyone. Our friend Cyrus Raji produced the first study from the University of Pittsburgh that said if you were overweight, if you had a BMI, so it's body mass index, we'll talk about that in a minute. So healthy is between 18.5 and 25. If yours was between 25 and 30, you actually had 4% less volume in your brain, and your brain looked 8 years older than healthy people. If you are obese, if your BMI was over 30,
right,
you had 8% less volume in your brain, and your brain looked 16 years older than healthy
That's amazing.
people.
So that's what we mean by being obese is not, those fat cells are not innocuous.
It's definitely not helping you. When I read that study, I went and actually looked at our own normal database,
Yeah.
and what we found, exactly the same thing in our normal database, and the problem in the brain was in the front part of the brain, so the prefrontal cortex, which you're going to learn about, but it's the most human, thoughtful part of the brain. Forethought, focus, judgment, impulse control, organization, planning, empathy, learning from the mistakes that you make. And so in order to get really healthy, you have to have fairly good impulse control. Right. And the weight was damaging this most human, thoughtful part of us.
So I just have to throw this in. So I suppose it's fair to say, or at least my husband would say, that I'm a tad extreme in a lot of things that I do. So I'm a little intense. And so when I decided to get really healthy and plant this in my family's life, like I wasn't kidding. So I got rid of everything in the house. You know, my husband's much more balanced, and he, you know, doesn't see the world as black and white like I do. And so he would come home and he's like, we have no bread, like none really. There's no bread, there's no dairy anywhere in our house. And so it took him a while to sort of see my extreme view of health. And, you know, we fussed a little bit over what it meant. He's like, you know, everything's not of the devil. And I remember that line, you know, bread is not of the devil, until he really understood, you know, and got on board with the gluten aspect. And when he read that study, all of a sudden things changed.
I got serious. When I heard as your weight went up, the size of your brain went down, I lost about 30 pounds. I was like,
Right.
okay, I'm on board.
And suddenly he
and
was
then got
harassing-
stronger than ever.
And he was harassing me. And I just thought that was so
Well,
funny.
and that's really where it works the best, where if the couple is on board,
Right.
so when I'm weak, she can be strong, or she's weak, I'm strong. We're there for mutual
Oh, yeah, no.
support.
It's really nice having a partner on board with you.
So, as your weight goes up, the size of your brain goes down. And as you keep saying, fat is not innocuous. Fat actually is the largest endocrine organ in the body. What does that mean? Endocrine organs are organs that produce hormones that have effects in other parts of the body.
Yeah, it's like 32 or 33 chemicals released by fat cells that are not good for you.
Fat cells store toxins. They release lipid droplets, so these little fat particles. They produce pro-inflammatory cytokines. So a cytokine is something that can actually produce damage in distant places in the body. It promotes insulin resistance and decreases testosterone in men, but also in women. And so it can take healthy testosterone levels, and testosterone helps you with motivation,
Right.
with mood,
And
with
this is
memory,
even for women.
with sexuality. And, you know, I often say, is anybody besides me bothered by all the pregnant men in our society? Because the belly fat it's sort of turning them into...
But it's by far the most unhealthy for you.
It is not good because it takes healthy testosterone and turns it into the unhealthy, cancer-promoting forms of estrogen.
And
So you
it's
want to
also-
avoid the dinosaur syndrome. It's
Yeah.
a term I coined a number of years ago. I was on a plane flying from Chicago to Des Moines for public television.
I remember this.
I was sitting next to a woman who was really overweight, and I wanted to lean over to her and say, you don't want to be a dinosaur. You know, big body, little tiny brain.
Sometimes I
You're
can't take him
going to
anywhere.
become extinct. And then the next thought I had in my head was, shut your mouth. That
Yes,
is just so
that was the
rude.
thought in my head, too.
Never say that out loud. Because, you know, some of you may have had a mother like mine. If you don't have something good to say, don't say anything at all. And then I got home from the trip and I told Tana about the dinosaur syndrome, and she said, shut your mouth. Never say that out loud. You have enough people who hate you. And then we were a couple of weeks later in Pittsburgh. I was going to do some work with GNC, and I'm all excited. My career is going great, and people want to work with me, and their marketing director's morbidly obese. And it just irritated me. Because if you don't live the message of your life, you're not a good messenger. But, you know, I'm not saying anything because I'm trying to, you know, do business with these people. But that night, we go out to dinner at the Capitol Grill in Pittsburgh, and he orders 2 souffles for dessert. Now, it was for the table, but I'm like, Tom, you don't want to be a dinosaur. And all of a sudden, wham, I get kicked. I'm like, why do women wear pointy shoes? It's like, what's
they're effective.
that about? Boom. And
'Cause
she
they
gives
work.
me that look that only your wife can give you. Like, what the hell is the matter with you? Wait till I
it was
get you
better
home.
than,
I'm
like-
going to chew you out.
It was better than slapping you upside the head, right?
But Tom goes, what do you mean? I'm like, well, don't you know the studies? They were actually done here in Pittsburgh at the University of Pittsburgh that said as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. He said, no way. He said, my numbers, you know, like my cholesterol's fine. I just thought, you know, maybe at some point I'd get healthy. And he's like 42. And I'm like, are you done in your career? He's like, no. I said, well, you know, you're like the number 3 person. Are you finished? He's like, no. I'm like, well, then you need your brain to work. Right. And she's all mad at me. A month later, he'd lost 17 pounds. And now, it's like 3 or 4 years later, he's lost 80 pounds.
That's amazing.
And it's at that moment where I realized, John 8:32, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. If you've allowed your weight to get out of control, now's the time to get it back in control. And I can't tell you the number of people who've written to me that have lost 50 pounds, 80 pounds, 100 pounds, 400 pounds. Why? Because they don't want to be dinosaurs.
So we might have scared you a little bit with some of the stuff we talked about, like obesogens or environmental toxins that you don't have control over that may be affecting your weight that you can't just go on a diet for. But we're going to talk about how you actually can reverse that as well. So don't lose hope. We're not there yet, but there's lots of great things you can do to counterbalance those environmental toxins as well.
So here's Terry, who she heard me talk. And her dad had just died of Alzheimer's disease. And this is an exact quote. I knew I was fat and I knew I was ugly. I had no idea that I was ruining my brain. What I actually valued most about myself was my intelligence. And now you're telling me my bad behavior was ruining it. And over the next year, she lost 90 pounds. I'm so proud of her. So is anyone concerned? Some anxiety is good. I used to think my job as a psychiatrist was to lower your anxiety. That's not my job at all. My job is to tell you the truth. Some anxiety can motivate you. People with low levels of anxiety go to jail. They die early because they drive at 125 miles an hour down the freeway, or they eat anything they want, lying to themselves that it won't matter. But fear just gets you started. It's really that feeling amazing keeps you going for the long term. And that's what I love. And, initially when people take your class, it's like, oh, it's hard. They're like deer in the headlights. But then after a few weeks, when they sort of begin to get it down, what do they say?
Oh my God. Well, number one, they say, I can't believe I get to eat this much. I can't believe how much energy I have. And the big thing, and I have actually experienced this myself, and it wasn't because of weight, it was just because of being so sick. I had no idea what it felt like to feel good. So that's a really big thing.
And for me, when I lost the 30 pounds, no cravings.
Right.
I used to live my life with terrible cravings, whether it was for ice cream or diet soda or
that usually
pasta
happens within
or French fries. And the cravings just
So
went
that
away.
typically happens after week 1. Most people, some of the hardcore cases, it takes 2 weeks, but most people, about 75% of the class, will come back after the first week and go, I don't understand, because we'll give them a plan of what we want them to eat. We don't want them to be hungry because that's the kiss of death when you're getting someone started, right?
Yeah, this is not about deprivation.
No, and we want to make sure that we're making sure they're eating the right things at the right time so that they don't turn around and eat something that we don't want them to eat. And they'll come back and they're like, I don't understand. I can't eat all this food. I'm not hungry. Like, what do? I'm not hungry. I can't eat it. And that's like music to our ears, because what it means is their cravings, their addictions are being broken.
And ultimately, you have to think about it like an addiction. And
it is an addiction.
We'll talk about that as it goes
Let's
along.
be very clear. It's an addiction.
So, one of the very first steps is we want you to know what your brain type is. Everybody's different. I think it's one of the big breakthroughs of the work I've done with imaging in psychiatry. I realize that ADD is not one thing, that depression is not one thing, that addictions are not one thing, and that people who have issues with their weight, it's not one thing.
Right.
There are people who are impulsive. Some are compulsive. Some are both impulsive and compulsive. Some tend to be sad and some tend to be anxious. And then there are various combinations of these. So let us teach you a little bit about it. As part of the course, you've got to take our brain type questionnaire. But let me just go through it. So type 1 is what we call impulsive. And it can be overeaters or it can be addictions as well. They have bad impulse control, so that sort of makes sense. They get easily distracted. They have low activity in the front part of their brain, so they're not good at supervising themselves. And the prefrontal cortex is the brain's brake. It stops you from saying stupid things or doing stupid things. Here are 2 SPECT scans. One on the left is healthy. Here we're looking underneath the brain. So the top is the front part of the brain. The bottom is the back. And you see the holes, which means there's low blood flow to that part of the brain. So it's a term we call hypo, low, frontal, and it goes with this pattern. But we see it with people who are impulsive, easily distracted, procrastinate, get off task. They tell themselves they're not going to do something, then they go do it. Common in people who have ADD or attention deficit disorder, associated with low dopamine levels. So dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters we're going to talk about. It's a neurotransmitter involved in focus and motivation, drive, goes with short attention span, distractibility, disorganization is common, impulse control problems. And did you know that if you have ADD, it nearly doubles the risk of obesity? What we often see at Amen Clinics, we do 2 scans on people, one at rest, one when they concentrate. And what we find is when they concentrate, their brain drops, which means the harder they try, the worse it gets. So it's like try harder, and usually things get worse for them. So how do we help this type? We boost dopamine levels. And so how do you do that? You strengthen your prefrontal cortex, high protein diets. So they're concentration diets.
Right.
And you always talk about protein is like medicine.
So this is really interesting, and you always wonder if what you're saying to your children rubs off or not. And I have a really strong-willed child, but I love this because this was not about what I was teaching our 11-year-old. She actually came to me the other day, and I was going to make her some quinoa and some bananas in it, and she's like, I don't want that for breakfast. I don't like that. I don't like that or oatmeal or anything like that for breakfast. And I'm like, what? And so I said, well, do you want some gluten-free French toast? Because of course I put eggs in it in my version of gluten-free French. She's like, no. She goes, I want eggs. And she goes, I don't like all that stuff for breakfast. And I said, why? She goes, because I'm hungry right away and I don't get to eat lunch until like 12. And she goes, and I can't focus because I'm hungry and I'm distracted. And I'm like, how interesting. That's not something we really focused on teaching her. We tried to teach her about nutrition. But she was so clear about why she needed protein. She goes, I need something like turkey or eggs or something like that for breakfast.
Well, and it's so interesting because Chloe doesn't have ADD. But we have more ADD now than ever before. And you go, so why? Well, if protein helps you focus,
right?
What do we feed kids in the morning? Pop-Tarts, donuts, waffles, sugary cereal.
I see all the parents running out of the grocery store over to the school in the mornings with the donuts and the muffins and the bagels, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding. And then we complain that they can't sit still, that they can't focus.
And then we medicate them.
Right.
When I was growing up, it was bacon and eggs and sausage.
Right, it was a real breakfast.
I mean, it was loaded with protein. And there's actually studies on kids who have ADD. If they have protein in the morning, their medication will last longer throughout the day. So if you have ADD or one of your kids, more than one, has ADD, think of a protein breakfast. Exercise helps. It just helps so much because it boosts blood flow and helps strengthen dopamine in the brain. Stimulating supplements like green tea or rhodiola can help with impulsivity. We actually make something called Focus and Energy that can really help support healthy focus throughout the day. Stimulants, so if you take medication, at Amen Clinics, we like to go, well, what are the natural ways we can do it? But we're never opposed to medication. So stimulants like Adderall or Ritalin can help this type, or phentermine, which is something that helps decrease appetite, but it also helps with focus. So know your type, and then you can target treatment to your type.
Right.
Calming medicines, or even calming supplements like GABA or 5-HTP, they're not good for this type. They can actually make it worse. So here's Carlos, who's pregnant. You can see he's carrying the baby. And when we scanned him, he has low activity. His brain looks toxic.
Ouch.
But low activity here in the front, and it went along with impulsivity. On our program, and this was basically after about 30 weeks, right? So you see how long it took him to get unhealthy. And in half a year, I mean, his body is revolutionized. He has delivered the baby, if you will, and he is smarter and cognitively clearer and healthier than he's been literally in 30 years. Carlos is a warrior. We want that for you too. his brain, and I love this.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a
it's
message of
fascinating.
my life. You're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better. I can prove it. This is proof that Carlos revolutionized his life, and his brain is better.
Yeah.
Which means everything in his life is better. His marriage is better. His money is better. His sense of meaning and purpose is better. He's a better dad because he has better forethought. And this is his wife. And I love this image because his wife, who is not overweight,
Right.
took our program, lost 10 pounds, but she said her energy was better.
Right.
Her memory is better. She's cognitively clear. Now she's doing better things for her family, and her daughter, who was struggling with her weight, lost weight and felt better and did better in school. This is the warrior path that we are going to talk to you about a lot over this course. The second type are people who are compulsive.
Right.
They can't stop thinking. They get stuck on thoughts. So they get the same thought in their head over and over again. They talked to you about something 3 years ago, they're still on it. It's like, oh my goodness, let it go. They're compulsively driven. So the impulsive type, they don't think about food all the time, but as soon as they see it, they go get it.
Yeah, it's a little like the squirrel running by. It's like they're doing one thing and it's like, oh, squirrel.
Or they're the raccoons where it's
Right.
the shiny object
shiny
syndrome.
object.
These people, they think about it. I mean, the refrigerator calls their name over and over.
Right.
Again, they feel like they just have no control. They tend to be nighttime eaters. They worry. They have trouble sleeping because it's like they have a little mouse in their head and the mouse can't
Right.
get off the exercise wheel, and the mouse is yelling and screaming at them, oh my goodness, over and over, on and on. What we see in their brain is they're not hypofrontal, they're hyperfrontal, where their front part of their brain works too hard. So here again, 2 SPEC studies. Here we're looking at the most active parts of the brain. Blue is average activity. Red are the most active parts, typically in the back part of the brain, in the cerebellum. But when they're in the front, people can't stop
Right.
thinking. And it tends to go along with being worried and rigid. And if things don't go their way, they get upset. They tend to be oppositional, argumentative, hold grudges. It's just not that much
So what
fun.
happens if a man with type 1 marries a woman with type 2?
Well, he irritates her, and she never forgets.
That's like a marriage
about
from
it.
hell.
So what we want to do with this type is raise serotonin. So serotonin is another neurotransmitter, but serotonin and dopamine tend to counterbalance each other in the brain. So we want to raise serotonin. Exercise does that as well. 5-HTP is a supplement we really like. Another
Right.
one we like is called saffron. Helps to raise serotonin. SSRI, so certain medications, Prozac, Paxil, Lexapro, Zoloft.
So interesting. If you were to give one of those SSRIs to type 1,
You can actually disinhibit them.
oh, it's not good.
No, then they end up doing things where they just scratch their head and they go,
What did
why
I
did
just
I do that? You want to nix the nighttime eating. So often 5-HTP at night can be really helpful for them. The right diet for them is foods, and we're going to talk about this in Eat Right to Think Right. What are foods that raise serotonin? So the short answer is think garbanzo beans, hummus,
Right.
which we actually may have for lunch, and sweet potatoes. You want to eliminate the bad brain habits, which of course we'll talk about. Now, the third type, where there's a combination of the two. They're impulsive and compulsive.
So it's like this little fight going on in their head.
Well, they have low frontal lobe activity and low dopamine levels. And in another part of their brain, they have high frontal lobe activity. So low frontal lobe activity in the underside, but high frontal lobe activity in a part called the anterior cingulate gyrus. I know
Right.
that's a big term, but people who follow my work, I write a lot about that. And so they have both low dopamine and low serotonin. I see this often in people who are children or grandchildren of alcoholics.
Interesting.
And I studied that extensively when I was a psychiatric resident and a child psychiatry fellow. And I just found, oh, that's so interesting. They tend to be both ADD and oppositional, or impulsive and compulsive. So ADD, but they'd hold grudges, and if things didn't go their way, they'd get upset. And if you gave them typical ADD medicine, it'd actually make them more obsessive, if you will. So I had to actually raise, and I wrote a book a long time ago about it called Healing the Chaos Within, about children and grandchildren of alcoholics. And at the time, I found Prozac and Ritalin together was like a miracle for them. And then over time, as I became more interested in natural treatments, I went, well, what about green tea rhodiola for dopamine, 5-HTP, and saffron for serotonin? You know, so our focus and energy supplement mixed with serotonin mood support together.
And we'll talk about the food-mood connection a little later.
Yes, we will. So if they have both impulsive and compulsive, or if you have both, boost dopamine and serotonin. So exercise, we said, did both. Maybe green tea and 5-HTP, or focus and energy, and serotonin mood support. You would rather do medication. A stimulant or an SSRI by themselves can actually make them worse.
Yeah.
So here's Dan, who is impulsive and compulsive. Again, he's pregnant and ended up delivering the baby.
That's like a huge
And one of my favorite pictures of Dan, he's at the top of the staircase. And these are all the clothes he's giving away.
That's awesome.
So we often say, you know, our work here at Amen Clinics is we're great for the economy, right? Because people will give away, you know, their clothes, their big clothes, to the poor.
Right.
We like that, right? I mean,
That's
you're
great.
doing something good for someone else, makes you feel good. And you have to go shopping. So, which I know is not your favorite thing to do. We're actually in Montreal. It was hysterical. Montreal in the winter. And they have this underground city.
And I'm so excited to go see the underground city, right?
Which is basically mile after mile of being in an indoor mall.
We walked in, and I'm like, this isn't a city, this is a mall. And we get lost, and I'm trapped. I'm like, I feel like I died and went to hell. I'm trapped in an underground mall that I can't get out of. It was awful.
She hates shopping. She's an unusual, beautiful woman.
Oh, God, it was terrible.
So anyways, Dan made it into one of my public television specials. He's lost 86 pounds by that time. Now it's more. But here he is with what 86 pounds of fat actually looks like. So can you imagine carrying this around? No wonder your knees hurt or your back hurts. You need to lose.
It's like the size of my 11-year-old. It's like carrying her around all the time.
The next type that we discovered were the sad overeaters, that they tend to medicate feelings of sadness with food, calm the emotional storms. They have a low mood, they tend to feel blue, their energy's not very good, their self-esteem tends to be negative. There's
Isn't this common in people in cool climates where they don't get a lot of sunlight?
And they tend to be low in vitamin D.
Yeah.
Tends to get worse in the winter. They have more pain syndromes. And as you said, they tend to gain weight in winter. Their limbic brain, there where the arrow is pointing, it works too hard. These people tend to do well with exercise, so it's sort of a theme.
Right.
Optimize your vitamin D level. And the supplement SAMe, which I really like, which has been found to be helpful for both mood and pain,
right,
or Wellbutrin, which is a stimulating antidepressant.
So let me get this straight. So far, exercise is good for all of the types.
Exercise is good for all of the types.
Right.
And a more balanced diet for these folks.
Right.
Then the last type is the anxious overeaters. They eat to soothe their nervousness or their anxiety. They tend to predict the worst. They have physical tension. Their basal ganglia, where the arrow is pointing to, works too hard. So this is like my type. And to help this type, meditation or hypnosis can be really helpful. B6, magnesium, one of our very favorite supplements. 80% of the population is low in magnesium. GABA can be really helpful. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Here's Eileen. She was an anxious overeater. Had lost 40 pounds. She was so happy to deliver the baby, even though she was above childbearing age. And this is what 40 pounds of fat looks like. So she doesn't have to carry that around
Right.
in her body anymore. So knowing your type is really important, but also knowing your important numbers. This
Right.
is just critical. You cannot change what you do not measure. So you got to know your important health numbers. So we talked about BMI, body mass index. It's basically how is your weight versus your height. It's a really simple number. You can get online and go BMI calculator.
So the only problem with BMI is for people who really work out a lot, who are very fit and have a lot of muscle mass, this is not an accurate number because...
Right, but for everybody else, it's good.
Right.
And so you want your number to be between 18.5 and 25. If you're overweight, 25 to 30, or obese, 30 to 40. If you're morbidly obese, so I have a brother, you know, who I love, but he just doesn't get it. And so you know, it's one of the ways I shock people. I'm like, okay, so how much do you weigh? How tall are you? And I'm like, he was 43. I'm like, buddy, you're morbidly obese. And he said to me, he said, you're so cold. And I'm like, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It was at dinner. We were in Tennessee, in Nashville, at the American Association of Christian Counselors. I speak there a lot. And one of my best friends is there, and he's injecting himself for his diabetes at the table with insulin. And I'm like, Mark, when are you going to get serious about your weight and your health? He's like, well, my weight's fine. And I'm like, okay, how much do you weigh? Boom, put it in my phone. How tall are you? Boom. I'm like, your BMI's 31. Dude, you're in the obese range. And he's like, boom. He's like, really? And the next month, he'd lost like 15 pounds.
Right.
And now he's down like 80 pounds.
Right.
And his diabetes is under much better control.
Right, which means he'll use less insulin, which means it'll be
know
better.
the truth, and the truth will set you
So
free.
for people who are very fit, use the waist to height ratio.
Correct. So your waist should be half your height or less. So when we did our big NFL study, BMI really didn't fit with these huge guys. And so, so your waist should be half your height or less. So I'm 5'6", that's 66 inches. That means my waist should be 33 or less. But you have to actually get a tape measure and measure it at your belly button, because quite frankly, people lie about it, or they just don't know. One of the pastors I worked with when we were doing the Daniel plan, I'm like, what's your waist size? He says 42.
It's so
I'm
funny.
like, well, let me measure.
Right, because they put it underneath
It
their
was
belly.
48. I'm like, dude, you're 4 feet around.
But it's funny because they put the belt under the belly. So,
Right. I mean, it's like the pregnancy, right?
Right.
You're at the measure it. The other thing important to know, I think you should know your calorie intake. Not for a long time, but for about a month, weigh and measure things. Now, for Tana's recipe, she's actually done that
They're
for
done.
you.
I've done it for you.
But I think it's just an important thing to know so you're not lying to yourself. Oh, well, I just had this 24-ounce steak. That's like 4,000 calories. You don't want to do that. You want to just have an idea of portion size and calories, because I think of calories like money. The number of fruits and vegetables you eat a day, because you should get, I mean, you know, people say you should eat 5 servings of
Yeah, I
fruits
usually
and
tell people
vegetables.
shoot for 9 cups and hopefully you'll hit 7.
Right. That if you really want to, I mean, you know, one of the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease is chemotherapy, is if you've had cancer. So if you want to prevent
Right.
Alzheimer's disease, you want to be on a cancer prevention program. The more fruits and vegetables, the better. But it should be in the ratio of 3 vegetables to 1 fruit.
Yeah, we don't want you all of a sudden switching from sugar to 5 pieces of fruit a day, because that is sugar.
Right. So that's not
So-
good for you. So think 3 vegetables, 3 servings of vegetable to 1 serving of fruit a day. We want you to know the number of hours you sleep at night. Sleep is just so stinking important. There's brand new research. You know, I've been obsessed about this, where you actually have a fluid system in your brain that washes your neurons and
Right.
washes out the synapses. but it only works when you're asleep.
Yeah.
So the washing, your
Right.
brainwashing in a good way, only occurs during sleep.
So apparently you told Chloe that before you told me, because I talked to her one night. I said, "Hi, honey." I said, I walked in the house. She was getting ready for bed, and I'm like, "So are you going to bed?" She's like, "I'm going to go wash my brain." I'm like, "What?" I had no idea what she was talking about.
So if you're not getting good sleep, we actually have a supplement called Restful Sleep. We have a hypnosis CD, especially for sleep, that you listen to and you
I
find
love it.
helpful.
Yeah.
Sleep is so
So
critical.
you also produce growth hormone when you sleep, which is really the hormone of youth and keeping you vital and strong and happy and motivated. And so you want to be getting enough sleep for that reason too. And if you're like me and you have this very busy brain, and I take medication that keeps me sort of wired and tired for the thyroid cancer, and so I keep my thyroid pretty high. So especially when we travel, it's hard. And that's where the meditation CDs and the guided imagery, I love to go to sleep to those, because they just, if my brain's busy, I have monkey mind, which I do. I just turn it up a little louder. I turn up the, my iPod or my phone a little bit louder over my monkey mind, and it just puts me out.
So you want to strive for 7 hours of sleep at night to give your brain plenty of time to wash itself. If you're only getting 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep, I want you to think of it, it's like a business where the cleaning crew never comes in and ultimately trash builds up. Or think of it like the trash collectors in New York are on strike. And it's just, you're not going to function as good as you could. And, ultimately sleep is 3 things. I say, and we'll say this about brain health, is 3 things: brain envy, got to care, avoid anything that hurts it, do things that help it. So sleep envy, really want you to care about it. Avoid anything that hurts your sleep.
Right.
So alcohol, because yes, you'll go to sleep, but you'll wake up
Right.
as you rebound.
Technology, too late.
Technology.
So get off your
tune in.
computer, get off your phone an hour before bed.
Because the blue lights can actually interfere with the production of melatonin that helps you sleep.
Absolutely.
Caffeine, exercising at night.
Yeah, I can't exercise at night.
Watching the news at night.
Oh my gosh, gets me so wired.
I think of CNN as the crisis news network.
Oh my
so
gosh.
filling your mind with those awful, horrible stories, and or find a network where they actually talk about wonderful things, and then do things that help. And what they've discovered is a cooler room works better than a
I
hotter
have
room.
to have it cool.
Completely get rid of all the lights, so all the little blue lights around the things plugged in.
If you have to get up in
turn
our
them
room
off.
at night, it's like you have to have a light, because I can't sleep if there's any light in the room at all. So it's
Right.
completely blacked out.
And some people do really well with environmental noises, like being at the beach or raining or something like that. So more tips for you for sleep, because it's just so important. We want you to have a sense of how much water you drink a day. Your brain is 80% water, and so making sure that you hydrate it. If you're at a reasonable weight, it's about half your weight in ounces. If you're morbidly obese, don't do that, because you'll overdo it. But if you think of 80 ounces a day, that's probably a good target. We want you to know your blood pressure. Did you know? Well, you did, because you hear me lecture. As your blood pressure goes up, above a certain level, it actually causes brain atrophy.
Right.
So you really want to get your blood pressure under control. Too low is not good, especially as you age. And then there's some lab work we want you to know. Cannot change what you do not measure. Like your CBC, we want to know what your complete blood count is, because if you're tired and anxious, it could be you're anemic.
Right.
We want you to know
that was a problem I had.
We want you to know your lipid panel or your cholesterol level. High cholesterol, excessively high, is not good for you. But please, before you let somebody put you on a statin, fractionate your LDL.
Right.
So people go, oh, HDL is good, LDL is bad.
Not that simple.
It's more complicated.
So think
than
of
that.
it like there's different types of LDL. Okay, there's just the LDL. There's big fluffy molecules and there's little dense ones. And the way I think of this and remember it is you want to have the big fluffy types. Think of the difference between a tennis ball and a golf ball. And if you're throwing them at a tennis net all day long, which one's going to get through, number one. The golf ball, the small dense one's going to go through and cause damage. And if you're throwing them at a wall all day long, which one's going to damage the wall first?
Right, or think of throwing it against glass.
Right.
The tennis ball will bounce off, the golf ball will break.
Right, so you want those big fluffy molecules. And then if your cholesterol's a little high, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to cause damage if you've got the right kind of cholesterol.
So cholesterol, and here I'll go out on a limb. So mine's right about 205, 210. A lot of doctors would put me on a statin, and there's just no way I would ever let them do that because my HDL is really high. It's almost 90, and my LDL is low, and I fractionated it. I have the majority of mine are the big fluffy A particles, and I have actually very few of the damaging B particles. So I want you to really think about understanding. There's a book you and I really like called The Great Cholesterol Myth,
really good.
written by friends of ours, Steve Sinatra and Johnny Bowden. And just really pay attention. Know what it is, but you want to be an informed consumer.
Right.
Your vitamin D level, low levels of vitamin D, it's really a universal risk factor. I mean, it's associated, low levels are associated with early death. When we did our first weight loss group with 50 people, 49 of them had low levels of vitamin D.
It's also associated with diabetes, heart disease, all sorts of things.
Cancer, MS, depression, dementia. So we want you to know your level.
And how easy is it? You just take vitamin D.
Get a blood test. It's called 25-hydroxy vitamin D. Normal's between 30 and 100. And quite frankly, I've never wanted to be at the bottom of any of my classes. I always try to keep mine around 80 or 90. And another interesting thing about vitamin D, when vitamin D levels are low, leptin, which is the hormone that tells your brain to stop eating,
that you're full,
doesn't work.
Right.
And so as soon as I increased my vitamin D level, my appetite went away.
We hear that.
I was so excited.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
We want you to know the ratio of omega-6 fatty acids, called arachidonic acid, to omega-3 fatty acids. So AA to EPA. EPA is one of the omega-3 fatty acids. That ratio should be 3 to 1.
And typically in our society, it's closer to 20 to 1, which is why we have so much inflammation. You don't want that.
And many of our patients have 40 to 1. So the higher levels of omega-6 compared to omega-3, the higher levels of inflammation you have. We want to know your thyroid level. Well, you can talk about this. It's just so important.
Well, and we find this to be a problem. So again, you can be on any program in the world, and if you don't get these numbers checked and your vitamin D, your thyroid, and your testosterone are off, you might lose a few pounds for a while. You might lose a little bit of inflammation. You're going to gain it all back. Thyroid is just so critical. And I can't believe how many people who come through our program, who come through even for brain health, we end up finding out they have Hashimoto's disease, or they're hypothyroid, or they have thyroid cancer. We've found that because nobody's checking.
Right. And you want to get a detailed thyroid panel, so TSH,
but you want
T3,
antibodies.
T4, and thyroid antibodies. Because often your thyroid will test normal with the screening ones, but your antibodies are really high. Remember Chloe's second grade teacher? She wasn't feeling well. I tested her antibodies. They were just off the charts.
She was foggy-headed and didn't feel right.
Bernadette from Ohio. She did exactly what I had said in my book. Get your thyroid antibodies checked. And her doctor didn't want to do it.
They often don't.
But she pushed him, and her thyroid antibodies were really high, sent her to an endocrinologist, had a nodule, and she had thyroid cancer. And she was just so grateful she got it caught early rather than when it had been late. Like you mentioned, you want to know your testosterone level, whether you're a man or a woman. Low levels are associated with depression, memory problems, low libido, low motivation.
So those three that I mentioned, vitamin D, thyroid, and testosterone, if they're low, they can also cause like psychological symptoms, depression, cause you to feel brain fog, low energy, fatigue.
Memory problems.
So thyroid is a huge, testosterone is huge for that, and so is vitamin D. You want to pay attention.
And the best way to boost your testosterone is not take testosterone. It's to kill the sugar. If you have a sugar burst, it lowers testosterone by up to 25% in one study. So if we share the cheesecake at the restaurant, no one's getting dessert when they get home. Homocysteine is also an inflammatory marker and has been associated with heart disease and dementia. So you want to know your level, and you can often lower it with B vitamins, particularly the ones we have in Neurovite Plus. You want to check your C-reactive protein. It's a direct measure of inflammation and inflammation. So if you break down the word inflammation, flame is right in the middle. And think of it like there is a flame going on in your body. It's not a good thing. And we think it's a major, no, it's a major cause of depression and dementia, heart disease, and so on. Hemoglobin A1C, so important. It's a measure of blood sugar over time. And high blood sugar, it's associated with blood vessel erosion.
So I think this is so interesting. You know, we talk about anti-aging medicine a lot, and women are, you know, so worried about getting wrinkles. The hemoglobin A1C, it measures how much sugar is sticking to the surface of your blood cells, and it sticks to protein on your cells. And what I thought was fascinating is it's actually an indicator of aging, of how fast you are aging. So it's very interesting.
Which is eating the way we're going to tell you to eat. Low glycemic, high fiber, lots of colors, healthy protein, healthy fat. It decreases aging. And it'll decrease your hemoglobin A1C. So you want to know what that is. We also want you to know your fasting, so you fasted 8 hours or more, blood sugar. Because high fasting blood sugar is associated with brain atrophy, dementia, diabetes, visual problems. I mean, every system in your body becomes troubled. There's one study from Kaiser. They looked at 57,000 people. And for every point above 84 fasting blood sugar, you had a 6% risk of being diagnosed with diabetes within the next 10 years. So,
and they actually say for every point over, I believe it's 79, you have an increased risk of heart disease.
So we want you to get your blood sugar measured and under control. So one of my favorite stories is Dr. Riz Malik. He's a friend of ours who used to work in our Reston, Virginia clinic, and he came from Pakistan, and he just was really trim and healthy when he came, but then he totally bought into the standard American diet, and he's like, oh my goodness, you know, Dr. Amen got healthy, I should get healthy, I'm trying to counsel my patients. And so he just did everything we said. And
I mean,
that's
amazing to me.
Saw.
And what doctor are you more likely to trust?
To trust. 20 weeks later, you have to live the message. Living the message is an important part, because when you live it, you can then give it away. So what do we want you to do now? We want you to know your type. Take the brain type test if you haven't done it already. Order your important numbers. So go to your doctor and say, look, these are the important numbers I need. And if he won't do it or she won't do it, you can go to a website like Save On Labs and order them yourself. I mean, this is the age where we're in charge of our own health. You want to recruit a friend to do this program with you. Our experience, when you do it with someone else, you're more likely
accountability
to
and support.
We want you to start thinking about your motivation to get well and to become a brain warrior. That's what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. And we want you to leave comments and questions below. So leave comments and questions. We'll answer as many as we can. And we're going to get the community involved in helping to answer them as well. Thank you so much for being on this warrior path with us. If you stay with us and do what we ask you to do, like so many other thousands of people, it's going to revolutionize your life.